Before we begin, a quick message to our incredible viewers. If this is your first time here or you're one of our returning supporters, we truly appreciate you. Your likes, comments, and subscriptions make a huge difference in helping us share these gripping stories with more people. So, if you haven't already, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button and drop a comment below about what you think of today's story. Your engagement keeps us going, and we thank you for being part of this journey with us. The night was still, with only the occasional sound of distant traffic breaking the silence. A woman named Linda sat in her living room, staring at the clock. The hands moved steadily, yet each passing second seemed to stretch into eternity. Her heart raced as she heard the faint rustle of leaves outside her window. She tried to tell herself it was just the wind, but the growing unease in her chest told a different story. Linda had been living this way for months, anxious, alert, and always looking over her shoulder. Her decision to testify against a powerful criminal gang had seemed like the right thing to do at the time. She had believed in justice, in doing what was necessary to protect her community. What she hadn't anticipated was how quickly her life would change. It all started with a high-profile trial. Linda, a schoolteacher, had witnessed something she couldn't ignore. A brutal act carried out in broad daylight by members of a gang that had terrorized her neighborhood for years. Their influence was everywhere, local businesses paid them for protection, and even the police seemed hesitant to cross them. She had wrestled with her conscience for weeks, torn between her desire to speak out and her fear of retaliation. Finally, she made the call that would alter her life forever. She agreed to testify. In court, Linda had stood firm, her voice steady as she recounted what she had seen. Her testimony was crucial, directly linking key gang members to a string of violent crimes. The verdict was swift, and several gang members were convicted. There were reporters, headlines, and even quiet praise from her neighbors. For a brief moment, Linda felt a sense of relief, as though justice had prevailed. Yet, as the weeks passed, she began to notice subtle changes. A car parked outside her house for hours at a time. Anonymous letters with no return address arriving in her mailbox. The unsettling feeling that someone was watching her every move. One night, a knock at the door shattered the quiet. She hesitated before opening it, only to find no one there. On the doorstep lay a single sheet of paper with 2 words scrawled across it, "We remember." Linda's world grew smaller with each passing day. She changed her routines, avoided familiar places, and kept her children close. Despite her precautions, the fear never left her. Before that fateful trial, Linda's life had been simple. She was a dedicated teacher who spent her days shaping young minds and her evenings caring for her 2 children. She lived in a modest home in a close-knit community where everyone knew each other's names. The gang's presence, though troubling, was something most people chose to ignore. They were an unspoken part of life, like an unwelcome shadow that loomed over the neighborhood. People whispered about their activities but avoided speaking out, fearing retribution. Linda's involvement began unexpectedly. She was walking home from work one afternoon when she stumbled upon a confrontation. A young man, barely out of his teens, was being assaulted by a group of men in broad daylight. Linda froze, her instincts telling her to look away and keep walking. Yet, she couldn't. She stood there, hidden behind a parked car, and watched as the gang members made their message clear: this was their territory. When the police arrived, the scene was already deserted. The boy, bruised and bloodied, refused to name his attackers. Linda was the only witness willing to come forward. Her initial statement seemed routine enough, but as the case grew, so did its implications. Prosecutors soon realized they had a rare opportunity. Linda's testimony could provide the missing link in an investigation that had stalled for years. The gang was tied to extortion, violence, and even a high-profile disappearance that had left the community on edge. Her courage could bring them to justice. Linda's friends and family were divided. Some admired her bravery, while others begged her to reconsider. They reminded her of the gang's reach, their history of silencing anyone who dared to oppose them. Still, Linda felt a moral obligation. She believed she could make a difference. The weeks leading up to the trial were tense. Linda received anonymous phone calls with no one on the other end of the line. She noticed strangers lingering near her children's school. Each incident, though subtle, added to her growing unease. In court, Linda's resolve never wavered. She identified the gang members without hesitation, describing their actions with clarity and precision. The defense tried to discredit her, but Linda's account was consistent and backed by other evidence. When the guilty verdicts were announced, there was a sense of victory in the courtroom. Yet, outside its walls, Linda knew the battle was far from over. Linda's quiet life unraveled further in the weeks following the trial. She knew retaliation was a possibility, but she hadn't anticipated the extent to which the gang would go to send a message. One evening, as Linda returned home from the grocery store, she noticed her front door slightly ajar. Her heart pounded as she approached cautiously, setting the bags down on the porch. She called out for her children, who were supposed to be at home, but the house was eerily silent. Inside, chaos greeted her. Furniture was overturned, drawers were emptied, and her walls were spray-painted with ominous phrases. In one corner, she found a photo of her family shattered on the floor, the glass broken into jagged shards. Though nothing appeared stolen, the message was clear: "We know where you live." Terrified, Linda called the police. Officers arrived quickly, documenting the scene and assuring her they'd increase patrols in the area. However, Linda could see the unease in their eyes. Even the authorities were wary of the gang's influence. The incident marked the beginning of a series of escalating threats. A brick with a threatening note was thrown through her window in the middle of the night. Her car tires were slashed, forcing her to find alternate ways to get her children to school. Linda's once supportive neighbors began to avoid her, fearful of becoming collateral damage in her fight against the gang. Her children, sensing her fear, started asking questions. "Why are people doing this to us, Mom?" her youngest daughter asked one night. Linda struggled to find the words, her heart breaking as she saw the worry etched on her children's faces. Then came the most chilling moment yet. Linda received an envelope in the mail containing photos of her children at their school and playground. The message was explicit: "Back off, or the ones you love will pay the price." It was a line she couldn't ignore. Linda packed a bag that night, taking her children to a relative's house in a nearby town. She hoped the distance would provide a temporary reprieve, but the fear followed her. Despite the constant threats, Linda refused to back down. She contacted law enforcement and insisted on further investigations. She knew the gang was responsible, but proving it was another matter. The police launched an inquiry, but the gang was careful, leaving no clear trail. One night, as Linda sat in the relative safety of her sister's home, her phone rang. The voice on the other end was calm but menacing. "You should have kept quiet," the caller said before the line went dead. Linda's mind raced as she realized the lengths to which they were willing to go. The gang's power extended far beyond her neighborhood, and their message was clear: no one who stood against them would remain untouched. The crime wasn't just a physical invasion of her life, it was psychological warfare. Linda found herself questioning her decision to testify, haunted by the thought that she had endangered her children. Yet, deep down, she knew surrendering now would mean letting the gang win. After the threats escalated, the police assigned a detective to Linda's case. Detective Harris was a seasoned investigator known for his persistence in dealing with organized crime. From the moment he arrived at Linda's doorstep, his demeanor was calm but determined, giving her a glimmer of hope in an otherwise bleak situation. Detective Harris began by reviewing the evidence: the break-in, the threatening notes, the photographs of Linda's children, and the suspicious calls. Each piece painted a clear picture of intimidation, but nothing directly tied the gang to the acts. The gang had perfected the art of fear without leaving tangible proof. Determined to protect Linda and her family, Harris recommended protective measures. A security detail was assigned to patrol her neighborhood and her sister's home. Linda's phone was tapped in case the callers slipped up. Her children were discreetly accompanied to and from school by plainclothes officers. Despite these precautions, Linda couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound outside her window made her heart race. She began to feel like a prisoner in her own life, unable to trust even the smallest semblance of normalcy. Meanwhile, Harris delved deeper into the gang's operations. He compiled a list of known associates, tracing their movements and financial dealings. Surveillance footage from around Linda's home revealed little, but Harris was relentless. He reached out to informants, offering protection and reduced charges in exchange for information. After weeks of painstaking work, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A young man, barely 19, approached Harris with critical information. He was a low-level member of the gang who had grown disillusioned with their violence and exploitation. In exchange for leniency, he provided details about their tactics, safehouses, and leadership structure. The informant revealed that Linda's case was being handled by one of the gang's enforcers, a man known only by the alias, Crow. Crow was infamous for his ability to intimidate witnesses into silence. According to the informant, he took pleasure in psychological warfare, tailoring each threat to his victim's vulnerabilities. With this new lead, Harris launched a targeted investigation into Crow. Surveillance teams tracked his movements, identifying his associates and frequent locations. They discovered that he operated out of a nondescript warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a hub for the gang's activities. However, building a case against Crow was far from easy. He was cautious, never directly implicating himself in any illegal activities. Harris knew they needed more than just circumstantial evidence to arrest him. One night, Linda received another call. This time, the voice on the other end wasn't threatening, it was pleading. The young man who had initially given Harris information had been discovered by the gang. Fearful for his life, he begged Linda to pass a message to the detective. Crow was planning something big. Linda relayed the message to Harris immediately, and he acted swiftly. A wiretap on Crow's phone captured a conversation that confirmed the informant's tip. Crow was planning to confront Linda directly, believing it was the only way to send a clear message to anyone else considering testifying against the gang. With time running out, Harris devised a plan. He coordinated with his team to set a trap, using Linda as bait. It was a risky move, but Linda, though terrified, agreed. She wanted to take back control of her life and ensure her children could live without fear. The operation was meticulously planned. Linda was fitted with a hidden microphone, and her home was equipped with surveillance equipment. Officers waited nearby, ready to intervene at the first sign of danger. The night of the operation was tense. Linda sat alone in her living room, her hands trembling as she pretended to go about her evening routine. Minutes felt like hours as she waited for something, anything, to happen. Finally, a figure emerged from the shadows outside her window. The man approached cautiously, his movements deliberate. Linda's pulse quickened as she recognized him from the photos Harris had shown her. It was Crow. He knocked once, then twice, before speaking through the door. His voice was calm, almost friendly, as he urged Linda to let him in. She hesitated, glancing toward the hidden microphone. The officers were listening, ready to act, but she had to keep him talking long enough to incriminate himself. Crow's tone shifted as Linda refused to open the door. He began making veiled threats, hinting at what might happen to her children if she didn't comply. Each word dripped with malice, and Linda struggled to maintain her composure. Before Crow could escalate further, the officers moved in. They surrounded the house, their presence announced by the sound of engines and flashing lights. Crow tried to flee, but he was quickly apprehended. Crow's arrest marked a turning point, but the ordeal was far from over. The gang's reach and influence meant they had loyal members ready to step in and protect their leader at any cost. Linda's cooperation in the operation had put her in even greater danger, and she knew the fight wasn't finished. At the precinct, Detective Harris began interrogating Crow. Despite the overwhelming evidence gathered during the sting, Crow remained calm, confident even. He refused to answer questions, instead leaning back in his chair with an air of defiance. Harris, however, was prepared. The wiretap recordings and video evidence were damning. Crow had been caught red-handed, issuing threats and attempting to intimidate Linda. Harris laid out the evidence piece by piece, watching for even the smallest crack in Crow's composure. Crow's smirk faltered when Harris mentioned the young informant who had cooperated with the investigation. While Harris didn't reveal the informant's identity, the insinuation was enough to rattle Crow. For the first time, the enforcer seemed unsure of himself. Meanwhile, Linda faced another kind of trial. News of Crow's arrest spread quickly, and with it came renewed attention from the gang. Anonymous calls, cryptic messages, and even strangers lingering near her home became a daily occurrence. The psychological toll was immense, but Linda refused to back down. The climax came during Crow's arraignment. The courtroom was tense, filled with reporters, law enforcement officials, and even suspected gang members. Linda sat in the gallery, flanked by officers for her protection. It was the first time she had seen Crow since that night, and the sight of him sent a chill down her spine. As the charges were read, Crow's attorney attempted to argue for his release on bail, citing a lack of physical evidence tying him to the gang's larger operations. Harris, however, had anticipated this move. He had spent weeks compiling a detailed case, connecting Crow to a string of crimes through witness testimonies, surveillance footage, and financial records. The prosecution presented their case with precision, laying out the evidence step by step. They played the recordings of Crow's threats to Linda, and the courtroom fell silent as his voice echoed through the speakers. Linda clenched her fists, her resolve strengthening with every word. When it was Linda's turn to testify, the room held its breath. She described the threats, the break-ins, and the fear that had consumed her life. Her voice wavered but never broke, and her testimony was both heartbreaking and compelling. As Linda spoke, she noticed Crow watching her intently. His expression was unreadable, but for the first time, she saw a flicker of something other than confidence in his eyes, perhaps frustration or even regret. The judge denied Crow's request for bail, citing the seriousness of the charges and the risk he posed to the community. As Crow was led away in handcuffs, Linda felt a surge of relief. It wasn't over, but it was a step forward. However, the moment was short-lived. As the court adjourned, Linda received a chilling message on her phone. It was a photo of her children at their relative's home, accompanied by a single word, soon. The message was a stark reminder that Crow's arrest didn't mean the end of the gang's threats. Linda turned to Detective Harris, who immediately assured her they would trace the sender and ramp up security measures. In that instant, Linda realized the depth of her fight. It wasn't just about her safety, it was about breaking the gang's grip on the community and ensuring no one else would have to endure what she had faced. In the weeks following Crow's arrest, the investigation into the gang's operations intensified. The police, armed with the evidence from Linda's case and information from other sources, launched a series of raids on suspected gang hideouts. Several key members were arrested, and a cache of illegal weapons, drugs, and documents detailing their operations was uncovered. Detective Harris kept Linda updated on the progress. Each raid, each arrest felt like a small victory, but Linda's life remained far from normal. The gang's lingering threats weighed heavily on her, forcing her to stay under police protection. Her children were relocated to a secure location, and Linda had to endure the pain of being apart from them for their safety. One day, Harris brought unexpected news. The young informant, who had initially provided critical information, had agreed to testify in exchange for witness protection. His courage inspired Linda, giving her the strength to continue her fight. Together, their testimonies formed the backbone of the prosecution's case against the gang. As the trial approached, the community began to rally around Linda. People who had once been too afraid to speak out against the gang came forward, offering support and sharing their own stories of intimidation and fear. Linda's bravery had ignited a spark, showing them that the gang's power could be challenged. The trial itself was a lengthy and grueling process. Crow's defense team attempted to discredit Linda and the other witnesses, painting them as unreliable and exaggerating their claims. But the prosecution's evidence was overwhelming. The recordings of Crow's threats, the testimony of the informant, and the results of the police raids painted a damning picture of the gang's activities. When Linda took the stand again, she spoke with a clarity and determination that silenced the courtroom. She described not only her own experience but also the broader impact of the gang's reign of terror on the community. Her words were a powerful reminder of the human cost of crime and the courage it took to stand against it. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury delivered their verdict. Crow was found guilty on multiple charges, including intimidation, conspiracy, and racketeering. He was sentenced to a lengthy prison term, effectively dismantling the gang's leadership. The verdict brought a wave of relief, but Linda knew her journey wasn't over. The gang's influence had been weakened, but it would take time and continued effort to fully restore peace to the community. Linda, however, was determined to see it through. In the aftermath, Linda and her children were relocated through a witness protection program. It was a bittersweet transition, leaving behind her old life and the community she had fought to protect. But it was also a chance for a fresh start, free from the shadows of fear. Months later, Linda received a letter from the young informant who had testified alongside her. He thanked her for her bravery, admitting that her strength had inspired him to make the difficult choice to come forward. The letter was a poignant reminder of the ripple effect of courage, showing how one person's actions could inspire others to do the same. Linda's story became a symbol of resilience and hope. Her willingness to stand up against the gang not only brought justice to her case but also paved the way for a safer future for her community. Though her life had been irrevocably changed, she found solace in knowing that her struggle had made a difference. As she sat in her new home, watching her children play in the yard, Linda allowed herself a rare moment of peace. The road ahead was still uncertain, but she had reclaimed her life, and with it, a sense of hope that no amount of fear could take away.